Assalamu alaikum everyone, this is Seema Nazir and welcome back to Knowledge Realm. Students, today we're going to start a very huge and important chunk of Pakistan Affairs course for CSS examination. We're going to start pre-partition history of Pakistan. This is the part of the history that starts in 1857 and ends in 1947. This is very important part of history, very important portion of syllabus of Pakistan Affairs. So I'd like to advise all the CSS aspirants, do not skip even a single event from this time period. Read it thoroughly, prepare it very well to score good in Pakistan Affairs examination. And the source of this lecture, the source of the material that I'm going to give here today, that I'm going to teach here today, is the book Trek to Pakistan by Ahmed Said. The book is very interesting and it explains this pre-partition history of Pakistan very well, and it is also recommended by FPSC. So have faith in me, you're in safe hand, and whatever you're going to study here today is authentic and it is from the book Trek to Pakistan. So stay focused and let's get started. So here is the list of the contents of the lecture. Here is everything what we're going to study today. We're going to study Causes of Indian Revolt by Sir Syed Ahmed Khan, 1858, the booklet written by Sir Syed Ahmed Khan. We're going to study very briefly about this booklet. Then we're going to study Government of India Act 1858, then Queen Victoria's Proclamation 1858, then Indian Council Act, Hindi-Urdu Controversy, formation of Indian National Congress, then Indian Council Act of 1892, and then we're going to end this lecture with Partition of Bengal 1905. So this is the little portion of the pre-partition history of Pakistan that we're going to study today, and we would continue these lectures till we reach 1947, and we will try to cover all the events, all the laws and everything that happened in the pre-partition history of Pakistan. So Alhamdulillah, we are done with the history of rise of Muslim rule in India, Mughal rule in India, and then the decline of Muslim rule in India and War of Independence, causes of War of Independence. We have Alhamdulillah studied all of this in much detail in previous lectures. So now we would continue from the situation after War of Independence 1857. What happened after War of Independence? War of Independence actually ended on November 1st, 1858. After War of Independence, East India Company was abolished and India came under the direct rule of British Crown. Now students, make one thing clear here, that before the War of Independence, India was not under direct rule of British Crown. I mean, British Crown was ruling India but not directly. There was East India Company in between India and the British Crown. East India Company was ruling India on behalf of the British Crown. But after the War of Independence, the company was abolished and the India came under the direct rule of British. Mughal Empire fell completely and Muslims were in abysmal condition. Before the War of Independence and before the arrival of British in India, Muslims were ruler of India. But after the arrival of British and after War of Independence, Muslims were in abysmal condition. They were miserable. They were crushed completely. I've added a quote here from the book Trek to Pakistan that explains, that gives an idea of the hatred that British felt for Muslims. So just read it and feel the hatred. Let's see what this person, James Broadwood, says about Muslims. James Broadwood Lyle, who was a British administration, told his father in 1858 that if the Muslims could by any means be entirely exterminated, it could be the greatest possible step towards civilizing and Christianizing the Hindustan. Now just feel the hatred that British used to feel against Muslims. They hated Muslims. So we can make an idea of the condition of Muslims at the time by this quote here. Then Sir Syed started efforts for the regeneration of Muslims. He wrote the Causes of Indian Revolt, in which he traced the actual causes of the revolt, and he tried to explain to British that Muslims were not the only reasons behind the War of Independence. They were not the mastermind of the independence. He tried to vindicate Muslims from this blame, and he tried to explain to Britishers that there were some things where the Britishers were wrong. So this was his effort to prove Muslims innocent, and then eventually British understood the problem and they started doing reforms. Now let's study briefly the Causes of Indian Revolt by Sir Syed Ahmed Khan. The booklet written by Sir Syed Ahmed Khan, in which Sir Syed tried to vindicate Muslims from the blame of planning and conspiring the mutiny, the revolt against the Britishers. Students, 1857 was the year of great misery for the Muslims of subcontinent. Muslims were oppressed, they were crushed, and they were a special target of Britishers. Why? Because Britishers believed that it were the Muslims that conspired against Britishers. They believed that the masterminds of War of Independence were Muslims. They felt that Muslims want to snatch back the rule from Britishers, so they launched this War of Independence. They put all the blame of War of Independence on Muslims because they knew that there was no significant difference, no significant change in the life of Hindus. Hindus were first ruled by Muslims, then they were ruled by Britishers, so there was no difference in life of Hindus. But it were the Muslims who faced the actual decline. Before the arrival of Britishers, Muslims were rulers, but after the arrival of Muslims, they were ruled by Britishers. The rule was snatched from Muslims. So Britishers believed that these are the Muslims who want to snatch back the rule from Britishers, who want to expel Britishers from this land. So Britishers made Muslims their special target, and they wanted to prevent any further rebellion. So they just started to crush Muslim. They started to oppress Muslim in every possible way. Then Sir Syed came to forefront. Sir Syed took it upon himself. He did not care about his life, he did not care about his safety, and he came to bite the bullet. Sir Syed started to write to save Muslims from the persecution of Britishers. He wrote the Causes of Indian Revolt. He tried to justify the position of Muslims and traced the actual causes of the revolt. In all the causes, the most important cause was the disassociation of Indians in the legislative process of India. It was mentioned by Sir Syed Ahmed Khan in the book The Causes of Indian Revolt, and he said that the activities of Christian missionaries also inculcated discontent and hatred in the hearts of Indians. He explained to Britishers that Muslims are not the sole responsible of this War of Independence, but it were the Indians. All the Indians were discontented and dissatisfied with Britishers' policies. Then he published 500 copies of this book, and he sent all but 2 to British Parliament without even thinking of his life. One of his friends warned him, and what he replied. Now just to read here what he replied. He said, Sir Syed Ahmed Khan said, "I consider it as a service to the country, nation and the government to make all my views public, and therefore any harm that befalls me by doing anything which is beneficial for the people and the government is acceptable to me." This is what he said. He was such a determined person. He was brave, he was audacious, and he came to front, and he took it upon himself and he wrote for the betterment, for the safety of Muslims. He tried to defend Muslims of India. Then the Secretary of State of India said, "This man has written an essay of highly rebellious contents. Therefore, he must be asked to explain, and if he fails to give a satisfactory answer, he must be severely punished." But Sir Syed Ahmed Khan explained his arguments very well, and eventually British understood where the government went wrong, and they started doing reforms. So this was the brief account of the Causes of Indian Revolt, an effort did by Sir Syed Ahmed Khan for Muslims, and I believe that this is enough for the sake of this lecture. Now here is the list of all the reforms done by British after the War of Independence. We're going to study all these reforms today. We're going to start with Government of India Act 1858, then Queen Victoria's Proclamation of 1858, then Indian Council Act of 1861, Indian Council Act 1892, and then Partition of Bengal would be our last event that we're going to study today. So the first thing that British did after the War of Independence was that it gave Government of India Act 1858, and it made a proper government for India. East India Company was nationalized and a proper government was made for India. India was now under Crown directly, and I've explained it earlier that before War of Independence, India was under East India Company, but after the end of War of Independence, British took the responsibility to rule it under the Crown directly, and India was then made the official colony of British. A Secretary of State was also appointed to run the affairs of India. Lord Stanley was the first Secretary of State of India, and Charles John Cannon, who you can see here on the slide, he was appointed as the first Viceroy of India. Doctrine of Lapse, which was introduced by Lord Dalhousie to annex all the princely states with the British state in India. Doctrine of Lapse was abolished, and Indian civil service was also established to run the affairs of India. So this was the first step taken by British after the end of War of Independence. Another thing done by British was that Queen Victoria's Proclamation was given after War of Independence. Indians were pardoned, but not the one who were involved in the killing of British citizens during the war. Rights of Indian subjects were recognized, equality of opportunity to join government jobs, but this was not for Muslims. Okay, keep this in mind that this was just given in Queen Victoria's Proclamation, that there would be equality of opportunity, but this was not the case for Muslims. Muslims were not given equality of opportunity, but they were just oppressed, and they were not in good times. So this was not Muslims. Okay, freedom of religion, this was also not for Muslims, for all other religions of India, but not for Muslims only. Okay, so this was another reform by British after War of Independence. Now here is a very important and interesting act passed by the British Parliament, Indian Council Act of 1861. This is important, so pay attention. Indian Council Act 1861 was passed to associate the locals in the governing processes of India. Now try to understand and analyze the situation here. What was the main cause mentioned by Sir Syed Ahmed Khan in his book, The Causes of Indian Revolt? Sir Syed Ahmed Khan said that the main cause behind the revolt was the Britishers' failure to associate the locals in the governing processes of India. Britishers are ruling Indians, but they're not trying to understand Indians. They are just legislating, making laws, and imposing those laws on locals. On the other hand, locals are also unable to understand the intentions of the rulers. So what else are they supposed to do? What else they could do? They were destined to revolt then. They did not have any choice. So this is something that Sir Syed Ahmed Khan explained in the Causes of Indian Revolt, and now Britishers are able to understand, Britishers are comprehending now where they went wrong. So they started doing these reforms. They passed Indian Council Act of 1861 and they started associating the locals in the governing processes of India. Locals were added in the Governor General's Executive Council and these were called additional members. Students remember it that before the War of Independence there was just one cabinet of Governor General and it used to do the dual task of making the laws, that is legislating and then executing. So legislation and execution was done by a single cabinet, but after the War of Independence, the Governor General's Council was split into two and the Legislative Council was then called Imperial Legislative Council, and in that council locals were also added and these were called additional members. It was ordered that these members should not be less than 6 and greater than 12. But they were not given any authority in that cabinet. They were there just to give their feedback. They were appointed by the Governor General for 2 years and Governor General used to appoint rich merchants, landlords, Indian princes or retired officers. They could not raise any objections or ask any questions on the legislation. They were there just to give their feedback when asked. They also showed insufficient interest in the debates. It is recorded by historians and scholars that the additional members also were indifferent towards the legislation. They did not take any interest and they did not raise any objections very oftenly, but they were not also given the authority or given the liberty to raise any objection. Then a Vernacular Press Act was passed in 1878. Now what is this Vernacular Press Act of 1878? Well, actually this was an act passed by the Governor General's Imperial Legislative Council that intended to prevent the press of India from expressing criticism of British policies. Now just try to analyze the situation here. What these Britishers are doing. They are trying to pacify Indians by adding them in the Legislative Council. They are adding locals in the Legislative Council, so the Indians are happy now that we are now in the Legislative Council, we are the part of the government now, and government would listen to us now, and the legislation would be according to a consent now. A consent would be there in the legislation, but on the other hand, Britishers are trying to prevent the criticism of the British policies by this Vernacular Press Act of 1878. And you would not be surprised to know that when this act was passed, there was no objection by the additional members in the Parliament, in the Assembly. So this was all about Indian Council Act of 1861. It was an initiative by the Britishers, by the Parliament, to add locals in the governing process of India. And then they act Vernacular Press Act of 1878. Keep this in mind for the objective portion of the examination. And that's all about the Indian Council Act. Let's move further. Now here is a very simple and comprehensive chart of Indian Council Act of 1861. CSS aspirants can draw these kind of charts in examination to impress the examiner and score good. What were the essential features of this Act? First of all, additional members were added in Governor General Councils. These members should not be less than 6 and not be greater than 12. These were just the advisory members. These were called additional members. And the elite of India was appointed by Governor General for 2 years. These were rich merchants, retired officers, landlord, princes, and in this act, some powers was also given to the presidencies of Bengal and Madras. So these kind of chart make memorization easy. So I designed it for you people so you can memorize easily and understand very easily. So students, I wanted to keep this lecture in a chronological order. So now we're going to study an event that took place in 1867. A controversy was started in 1867, that is Hindi-Urdu controversy. Students, in this pre-partition history of Pakistan, you'd come across many such events when you would learn of the making and breaking of friendship between Muslims and Hindus. There were times when Muslims and Hindus joined together, they became friends. But then there were times when they were pole apart and they were rivals. But they ended up being rivals. I mean, not rivals, but they ended up being different and separate, and they ended up being separated geographically also. And this was destined, and this was for the betterment of Muslims and Hindus, both nations. So we're going to study all such events. I would try to cover all the events explained by Ahmed Said in his book. So first of all, we're going to study Hindi-Urdu controversy that was erupted in 1867. The issue was raised in Banaras in 1867. Hindu actually wanted Urdu to be replaced by Hindi as the second official language of India. Moreover, they wanted the Arabic script to be replaced by their Devanagari script. A French Orientalist said something very interesting, that the Hindus, because of their prejudice, resist everything that may remind them of the Muslim rule. Now try to understand it here. What does this mean? Students, Hindu actually were not trying to replace Urdu, but they were trying to vanish, they were trying to erase everything that may remind them of the Muslim rule. They were trying to eliminate everything that was related to Muslims in India. It was their prejudice that they were trying to do this. You see, Hindus also did a great contribution to Urdu, and Urdu was not just a language of Muslims in India, it was the language of India, the whole India, the Muslims and Hindus collectively. They both used to speak Urdu, they used to write Urdu, but then they started seeing everything with their prejudice, and they just wanted to eliminate everything, wanted to get rid of everything that flourished during the rule of Muslims in India. So this is the reason that they wanted to get rid of Urdu also. They thought that Urdu is the language of Muslims and we should get rid of it, we should eliminate it from India. So they started this controversy. You see, Ratan Nath Sarshar and Ram Bahadur Saxena were the people who wrote first literary history of Urdu. Hindus also did a very great contribution to Urdu. A very interesting image that I've posted here. You can see it here. Pandit Motilal Nehru, who was a Hindu leader and who was a very passionate leader of this Hindi-Urdu controversy, also printed the wedding card of his son Jawaharlal Nehru in Urdu language. You can read it right here. I have posted it here. It is very interesting. I read it in the book Track to Pakistan. So I wanted to share this knowledge. This was very interesting and I enjoyed it a lot when I read it. He printed his son's wedding in Urdu language. On the other hand, he wanted to get rid of Urdu. He wanted to eliminate Urdu from India. I mean, such irony this is. This is hypocrisy. Just see how he's inviting his guest. He's saying, Shirkat farmakar musarrat o iftikhar bakhshein, Pandit Motilal Nehru, muntazir jawab. He printed, he wrote everything in Urdu here. I mean, this was his his personal event, so he could have wrote it in Hindi if he loved Hindi so much, but he wrote it in Urdu. Such a hypocrisy. Then Muslim leaders tried to defend Urdu. Mohsin Mulk established an organization named Central Association, but in March 1898, Urdu was replaced by Hindi by Sir Anthony MacDonald. So this was the Hindi-Urdu controversy 1867, and I wanted to explain here that how a rift started erupting between Muslims and Hindus in India. Then in 1885, Indian National Congress was formed. It was another effort of Indians to take hold of the politics of India, and it further widened the schism between Muslims and Hindus. In 1883, a very controversial bill was passed in Imperial Legislative Council, that is Ilbert Bill, and it increased the rift between Britishers and Indians. What was this bill? Ilbert Bill actually allowed the senior Indian magistrate to preside over the cases involving British Indian subjects. I mean the Britishers who were living in India. So Britishers took this bill as their disgrace. They felt humiliated. They raised hue and cry in the parliament, and they felt disgraced. They started saying that, oh, now Indians would be resolving our cases. So they did not feel good, and this was a controversial bill. But this bill showed the Indians the way to Indian National Congress. It widened the gap between Britishers and Indians. Indians felt that Britishers look down upon them. A person named Alan Octavian Hume gave the idea of Indian National Congress. Alan Octavian was a retired officer, and the idea that he gave was not of a political platform, but of a social platform. But why he gave this idea? Octavian actually think of a way to prevent the rebellion that happened in 1857. Octavian wanted to start a social platform where Indians could present their grievances in front of the British so that no such rebellion erupt again in India. The main aim of the social platform was to support British Raj and create harmony, but the platform that was formed ended up to be a political kind of. There was a sharp difference between the Muslim leaders and the Hindus. Muslim leaders did not want to be a part of this Indian National Congress. Sir Syed was dead against this Indian National Congress. He did not want any Muslim to be a part of this political platform, because Sir Syed believed that no single party can represent Indian nations, because there is no single nation in India, but two nations, two major nations, that is Muslims and Hindus. These are two separate nations. Sir Syed gave two-nation theory. So this was the reason that Sir Syed did not support Indian National Congress. He realized that Muslims and Hindus are two separate nations, and he never supported Indian National Congress. Badruddin Tayyibji was the first Muslim president of Indian National Congress. I wrote it here so that CSS aspirants can remember it, and this would be beneficial for the sake of objective portion of the exam. So this was the formation of Indian National Congress in 1885. Then, after the formation of Indian National Congress, the Britishers realized that the time for a new reform has arrived, and now they should give another act. So Indian Council Act of 1892 was passed in Parliament. The main reason behind the passage of this act was that Indians are politically aware now, owing to the establishment of universities in different places, and Indian National Congress was also formed in 1885, and Indians were demanding representation in assembly. So in order to pacify Indians, Britishers gave another dose to Indians. This was the policy of Britishers, that they used to give dosages to Indians. First, they gave Indian Council Act of 1858, then 1861, then 1892. They are just trying to pacify the Indians. They were giving temporary dosages to Indians to prevent any rebellion. Lord Ripon was the Viceroy of India. Now, in this act, additional members of the Executive Council should not be less than 10 and should not be more than 16. The number of the additional members was raised to 10 and was raised between 10 to 16. Limited powers were given to them now. They could ask questions now and discuss the annual financial statement. Sir Aga Khan affirmed that the Legislative Council became the political training center. So, if we take it optimistically, if we take it positively, these reforms were not bad. These were good because, as Sir Aga Khan said, these were a way of training the people of India politically. So, we can take it positively also. Now here once again the chart of Indian Council Act 1892. Let's see what they did. Additional members who were added in Governor General's Council in 1861. Now they were raised to 10 and they should not be greater than 16. Additional members of provincial assemblies were also raised. They were fixed between 8 and 20. They were given some powers this time. Now they could raise questions. Additional members could also ask questions on the annual financial statement. Provincial legislature were also given more powers. So this is the brief account of what the Britishers did in Indian Council Act of 1892. For Syed's perspective, from point of view, this is enough. Now, a very interesting event that took place in 1905. This was also a reform by British, but this reform widened the rift between Muslims and Hindus. Partition of Bengal of 1905. In 1905, Lord Curzon, who was Viceroy at the time, partitioned Bengal into East Bengal and West Bengal. East Bengal was 2/3 Muslims and West was mostly Hindus. The partition was proposed by Charles Grant in 1853, but the partition was done by Viceroy Lord Curzon in 1905. This partition evoked opposition from Hindus. Hindus kicked a severe storm of protest throughout the India. They did not like this partition. But why British partitioned? What were the reasons behind this reform? The partition was actually fair, it was justified, and it was a good step for Muslims. There were genuine reasons behind the partition of Bengal. There were administrative reasons behind the partition of Bengal. Bengal was actually a very huge province. The administration was very difficult. It was not possible for a single governor to administer this huge province single-handedly for 5 years. The population of the province was 7 crore 8 lakh in 1903 and the area of this province was 1,89,000 miles. So it was difficult for one governor to administer this huge province. Due to this huge area and the huge population, East Bengal was neglected by government. Government was not able to start developmental projects in East Bengal. Government was not able to take care of East Bengal properly, and The condition of East Bengal is enlisted here. You can make an idea by reading down. Only 3 colleges were there in East Bengal, whereas in West there were 26 colleges. East Bengal did not have any science college, whereas West Bengal had 3 excellent science colleges. There was no railway network or network of communication in East, but good network of railway and communication in West. So East Bengal was not in good condition. The government failed to do anything for the development of poor people of East Bengal. So these were the reasons that Lord Curzon decided to partition this huge province into 2 provinces, that is East Bengal and West Bengal. On 20th of July, the decision was taken, and on October 16, it was officially East Bengal, and Hindus celebrated this day as Black Day. Hindus did not like the partition of East Bengal and West Bengal. Now let's study the reaction of Hindus, how Hindus reacted to the partition of Bengal of 1905. Hindus did not like the partition. They kicked up a severe storm of protest. Lawyers protested as they apprehended the establishment of Dhaka Court, which would adversely affect the legal practices of lawyers and would also damage the political interest. It was not in favor of lawyers. It was also not in favor of newspapers. Newspapers were also not happy with the partition. They also protested. They did not want the partition of press of East Pakistan and West Pakistan. It decreased their importance. It decreased the strength of newspapers. So newspapers also protested. Landlords who had lands in East Bengal, the Hindu landlords who had lands in East Bengal were also not happy, because they lost all the peasants, the Muslim peasants who used to work on their lands. So they also protested. Then Hindus started Swadeshi movement on August 7, 1905. This was a very gruesome movement started by Hindus, and its main aim was to boycott imported products and most importantly the British clothes. It called upon all and sundry to stop using the imported clothes. Hindus started putting the foreign clothes to torch, and Hindu students used to attack their fellows if they were found using the foreign products and foreign clothes. It fomented hatred not only against British but also against Muslims. So this was the Swadeshi movement started by Hindus. Muslims started facing discrimination in West Bengal, and they faced the worst time of their lifetime in Bengal. They were oppressed there, and this was the reaction of Hindus in India on the partition of Bengal. Now let's see how Muslims reacted to the partition of Bengal. Muslims were actually happy. They got the opportunities of education and employment. East Bengal started developing. Education of female was also upgraded. By 1911, 5 divisions of East Bengal had colleges. Before 1905, East Bengal did not have any good college. But after the partition, development started, education was developed, and East Bengal started making colleges. Teaching community was also good. Teaching community saw more Muslim teachers. There were 12 teachers in Dhaka College, but by the end of 1911, there were 30 teachers. During 1906 to 1911, more than 200 miles of railway track was laid down. Chittagong port was also modernized, and East Bengal was developed then. So this was a good attempt. This was a good act by British, for Muslims. But then in 1911, the partition was annulled, and Muslims were shocked and they felt betrayed. Muslims were then disillusioned. This was something that disillusioned Muslims, and Muslims realized that they should stand up and they should speak for their rights. So this is the end of today's lecture. Today we have studied a lot. We have studied pre-partition history of Pakistan, and we're going to continue this till we reach 1947. We will try to cover all the events. We will try to cover everything that is in the book Trek to Pakistan. And trust me, students, it is very interesting. I would try to make the history interesting and simple for you people. It would not be dry. It would not be boring. I would try to make it interesting for you. So this is enough for today. Stay focused, study hard, and Allah Hafiz till next lecture.